Chapter 1. It was a source of constant disappointment to Catherine Morland that her life did not more closely resemble her books, or rather, that the books in which she found its likeness were so unexciting. Plenty of novels were set in small country villages and towns, like the Dorset hamlet where she lived. Admittedly, they didn't all have such ridiculous names as the one in the Piddle Valley, where her father's group of parishes was centred. It would have been hard to make credible a romantic fiction set in Farley Piddle, Middle Piddle, Nether Piddle, and Piddle Dummer. But in every other respect, books about country life were just like home, only duller, if that were possible. The books that made her heart beat faster were never set anywhere she had ever been. Cat, as she preferred to be known, on the basis that nobody should emerge from their teens with the name their parents had chosen, had been disappointed by her life for as long as she could remember. Her family were, in her eyes, deeply average and desperately dull. Her father ministered to 5 Church of England parishes with good-natured charm and a gift for sermons that were not quite entertaining, but not quite boring either. Her mother had given up primary school teaching for the unpaid job of vicar's wife, which she accomplished with few complaints and enough imagination to leaven its potential for dreariness. If she'd had an annual performance review, it would have read, "Annie Morland is a cheerful and hard-working team member who treats problems as challenges. Her hens are, for the 3rd year in a row, the best layers in the Piddle Valley." Her parents seldom argued, never fought. Between the two of them there wasn't a single dark secret. Even their home was a disappointment to Cat. 10 years before her birth, the Church of England had sold the drafty Victorian Gothic vicarage to an advertising executive from London and built a modern executive home with all the aesthetic appeal of a cornflakes packet for the vicar and his family. In spite of its relatively recent construction, it had developed just as many drafts as its predecessor, with none of the charm. It was not a backdrop that fueled her imagination one whit. Cat's tomboy childhood had been a product of her desire to be the heroine of her own adventure. The stories she had first heard and later read for herself had fired her imagination and given her a fantasy world to play with. Her delight at having siblings, older brother James and younger sisters Sarah and Emily, was largely due to the roles she was able to assign them in her elaborate scenarios of battling monsters, rescuing the beleaguered and conquering distant planets. For most children blessed, or cursed, with so vivid an imagination, the natural outlet is school. But Annie Morland had experienced what she called the education factories at first hand, and it had left her with a firm conviction that her children would best thrive under her own instruction. And so, Cat and her siblings were denied exposure to a classroom and playground society that might have subjected them to life's harsher realities. No one ever stole their dinner money or humiliated them in front of a roomful of their peers. Instead, they came under the constant scrutiny of a mother and father who wanted only the best for them. James, blessed with natural wit and intelligence, would have succeeded whatever educational system had been imposed on him, and Cat, who cared more for narrative than knowledge, would probably have done no better wherever she'd been taught. They would certainly have become wiser in the ways of the world if they'd escaped their mother's apron strings, but had that been the case, their story would be too commonplace to hold much interest for an ardent reader. Their only significant contact with their peers happened in the small park that had been created